Rounding out our symposium, before we have a few questions and a few summarizing remarks, is Manuel Gonzalez. Manuel joined the Chase Manhattan Bank in 1988 as Vice President, Executive Director of its art program, for which he oversaw the development and maintenance of the bank's collection worldwide. Later on, becoming Global Art Executive at J.P. Morgan Chase, in charge of J.P. Morgan's private bank's art advisory services. Then Manuel sat on the J.P. Morgan Chase Art Committee, which oversaw the firm's art collection until he retired in 2005. In that year, Manuel became the curator of the Ellipse Foundation, Portugal, where he co-curated its opening exhibition, Towards the End of the Beginning. In his 6 decades in the art world, he has curated numerous exhibitions worldwide, including 10 Floridians, Miami Art Central, Art at Work, at both Houston Museum of Fine Arts and Houston Museum of Contemporary Arts, the traveling exhibition to the Queens Museum, Feliz González Torres, the Museo Tamayo, Mexico City, La Generación de los 80s, Museo Lomata in Santiago, Chile, the Parallax View at the Lehman Mopin Gallery, and so on. He's also curated exhibitions in Argentina and Chile, and at the Yokohama Museum of Art in Japan. Still, Manuel serves on boards of numerous institutions, including the New Museum here in New York and the Cisneros Fontanels Foundation Museum, the Wolfsonian, and the Cintas Foundation. Manuel is also the first ever recipient of the Zenith Downtown Awards Projects Leadership and Award, and that was in recognition of his lifetime achievement in the arts. He was previously the co-director of the now legendary Sidney Janis Gallery and director of Holly Solomon Gallery, both of them, of course, in New York, as you all know. He lectures and writes on the arts internationally, and now, as we really are bringing our topic up to the present, as you can tell, Manuel is going to conclude our symposium with a paper, Art at Work, the David Rockefeller Legacy. Please welcome Manuel Gonzalez.
Since I'm the last speaker, I would like to congratulate Inga Rist for the wonderful, wonderful job the Center for the History of Collections has been doing for the last 7 years. And to Esme Quadback and to Samantha Deutsch, my congratulations as well, and many, many thanks. Well, I feel like the spy in the House of Love, but where is... okay. David Rockefeller took the relationship between business and the arts to a new level, changing the dynamic forever by giving it a different structure. This brief account is about the process of that change, the story behind the David Rockefeller legacy. That's Saul Steinberg's Downtown, his witty parody of Wall Street, dated 1987, although for the purposes of our lecture, we're going to go back to the mid-1950s, at the time when business seemed to be abandoning Wall Street for the more accessible canyons of Midtown. It was also the beginning of a tremendous period of growth and transformation for David Rockefeller and Chase. New mergers required new ideas, new images, and new headquarters. One Chase Plaza was the first skyscraper built on Wall Street since the beginning of the Great Depression, and it was due to David Rockefeller's indefatigable sense of history. Skidmore, Owens & Merrill was the chosen architectural firm, and Gordon Bonschaff, the architect responsible for the design for the first head office of an American bank in the contemporary international style. The first building in Lower Manhattan, surrounded by a large open plaza, and it indeed let in air and light. The interiors presented a problem. Employees were accustomed to neoclassical buildings in which columns, pediments, and ornamental sculptures acted as decorative elements. The new building's simplicity was perceived as cold and unwelcoming, a problem in response to which Gordon Bonschaff quipped, "Just put some art on the walls, it will warm it up." This cavalier comment became legendary, David Rockefeller's moment of epiphany. Art should not be confined to lobbies, as tradition dictated. Art should be everywhere and serve many functions. Provide a pleasant place for employees where they could do their jobs, and improve an environment that was often stressful and uninspiring. By placing art in the workplace, it was reasoned, people who might never visit a museum or art gallery could have access to original art. Behind all this thinking was the conviction that art could play a role in the world, that it could inspire, help change your perspective, and give you a more interesting way of solving a problem. The seeds of what would become the Chase Art program had been planted. This new concept called for a new approach. David, being David, sought the advice of the then director of the Museum of Modern Art, Alfred Barr, along with the director of every major museum in the metropolitan area as well as Boston. Alfred Barr suggested that a key member of his curatorial staff be in charge of selecting our purchase proposals because there were about 200-300 works at monthly meetings. And Dorothy Miller became the first corporate art advisor. David also considered crucial that other high-ranking members of the bank would join the program and share his vision. And the first formal corporate art program ever, and you see them all here, was created. And I think there is James Johnson Sweeney and Gordon Bunshaft and Alfred Barr and Dorothy Miller and David prominently in this particular picture. To strengthen the case, a pilot project was completed at Park Avenue on 54th Street. This bank branch and client center in the new Bauhaus style was the logical place to experiment, not only with art, but furniture, and Florence Knoll was brought into the project. Ms. Miller commissioned major works like this Alexander Calder mobile, which somehow managed to reflect the donut-shaped logo that Ivan Shermayev had recently designed for the new Chase Manhattan Bank. But the pièce de résistance was the Sam Francis mural, which was the largest canvas the artist ever executed. That's David talking. Sorry. I don't seem to be very technical today. The pilot project was wonderfully successful, and any lingering expectations about putting into place traditional art and furnishings considered proper for a bank setting were out the window. As part of the mission of the program, it was agreed that the collection should be guided by both philanthropic and decorative concerns. Philanthropic, by supporting younger artists and those struggling in mid-career by purchasing works, and decorative through the acquisition of Americana and indigenous art objects. Here's an example of the Knoll and Skidmore, Owens and Merriam collaboration on this is the San Francis, this is the Joseph Albers Homage to the Square, Cole in Late Day, and Florence Knoll furnishings in one of the offices at 14 Park. In addition, scores of relatively inexpensive items at the time by second-generation abstract expressionists were purchased, such as this James Brooks from 1953, it's an oil on canvas, and this Joan Mitchell of 1959, oil on canvas, 78 by 75. Dorothy Miller reported that at first David relied on his art committee to vouch for the quality of the bank's acquisitions, but he quickly developed a discerning eye for contemporary art. As she related the story, it was impressive how soon he was easily picking up out the best of the works of art that the committee considered for acquisitions at each meeting. Here are some of his favorite works: Pierre Soulages, 17th of July, 1959. Works on paper were also collected, like this Richard Diebenkorn of 1955. And here is a Charles Birchfield, fantastic depiction of nature, Pink Locust and Windy Moon of 1959. They were also early collectors of photography, like an African-American photographer, Carl Van Vechten, portrait of young Langston Hughes from 1949. Also some important lithographs, like Jasper John's illustration of the complexities of the creative process from 0 through 9, 1960. It's an edition of 35. And the then young pop artist Robert Indiana, The Marine Works of 1962. Regarding taste, risk, and acquisitions policy, there's never been a uniformity of opinion, and wasn't then. There were those who clung to a more conventional past, such as Harnett and Remington. They seemed to think that realism reassured their clients that they had not been corrupted by the wild and modern ideas that David Rockefeller was introducing. Rockefeller was quick to point out that the art was not being purchased as an investment. However, for those who still viewed art as frivolous and unnecessary expense, it was argued that good design doesn't cost more than bad design. As it turns out, those wild ideas ended up being highly profitable investments. The art program at Chase would always have its missionary aspects. Just as there were problems of choice, there were problems of placement. One of the first pieces of sculpture acquired was this Jason Seeley triptych, 1949, a composition of automobile bumpers welded together, forming a kind of bas-relief that measures about 7 feet long by 7 feet high. It was hung, as you can see, against a red mosaic tile on the concourse level at One Chase Manhattan Plaza. The mistake was hanging it during lunch hour. A crowd gathered and began to protest. In David's words, some got extremely exercised. Instructions were sent downstairs to take the bumpers down immediately. Now, it is important to stress that David started the collection, yes. He promoted the idea. Certainly the art program would not have happened without his enthusiasm, but he was not the chairman of the art committee. The chairman of the bank at the time was. The rule that he established was one member, one vote, regardless of hierarchy. The majority didn't vote for the Seeley, the bank did not buy it, so David bought it for his personal collection, while figuring out what to do with it. As part of the purchase agreement, the piece was to go on a year's traveling exhibition. A year later, during a weekend when no one was around, the Seeley was installed in its original location. On Monday, nobody said a word. The bank bought it back. It has remained in place ever since. For the well at the large plaza in front of the downtown headquarters that provides daylight to the subterranean level of the bank, David approached Isamu Noguchi. The Japanese-American artist proposed a Zen-inspired garden punctuated by raising rocks. Noguchi brought 6 massive free-form rocks from the Uji River in Japan and placed them in concentric patterns atop undulating light gray paving stones. This restful Japanese winter garden becomes a summer fountain when water gushes from the rocks. Searching for the proper sculpture for the main plaza proved to be difficult. Submissions were asked from the great sculptors, and some were rejected, like this Giacometti. He proposed this walking man along some standing women, and it was rejected. Henry Moore was rejected, Calder, Zorak, Hadzi, and Noguchi. Finally, Gordon Bonschaft brought David to Jean Dubuffet's studio in Paris. They returned with a model of the artist's group of 4 trees. It was perfect. Here's David with the artist. Again, there were people who were a little shocked. Again, David bought it. When he retired, however, the art program didn't have the budget to buy it back from David. So he donated it to the Museum of Modern Art. One last amusing addition to One Chase Manhattan Plaza, this time it's in a hallway. It's a work of art from Italian painter Massimo Campilli. It's an untitled 1949 mural, which was originally destined, here's a picture of the two pieces. This is a Campilli. It was originally destined to be placed in the ship Andrea Doria. But it sank, as we all know, off Nantucket, and the work was left crated on the docks of Manhattan. So Bonshaft convinced David and the art committee to buy it, as long as the artist added 2 extra feet to the work, so it would fit perfectly. The artist did, and so the painting does fit perfectly, except his signature is now 2 awkward feet from the frame, behind a strategically placed palm tree. It was 1968. David was made chairman of the bank. The collection was going to expand locally and internationally. Locally, they purchased Romeo Bearden, Blue Interior, Morning, 1968, wash, ink, and collage on board, and Roy Lichtenstein's Entablature No. 1, 1971, which was the artist's tongue-in-cheek answer to the striped paintings of the time, such as Ken Nolan. Also, Sol LeWitt's Circle Open and Square Open, lacquer on wood, these 2 figures as simple as they are complex, because we don't know whether it's a painting or a sculpture or architecture. Internationally, David thought it was a unique opportunity to share our art with the people of countries which welcomed Chase warmly. It would further the cause of international understanding by juxtaposing art of different nations where Chase did business. It was during those years that the collection became the corporate clarion of up-to-the-minute international art patronage. In Japan, he himself purchased from samurai costumes to one of the famed circles of Jiro Yoshihara of 1965, and commissioned Kenzo Okada to execute the 4 Seasons, which is about 7 feet by 12 feet. In Bolivia, he fell in love with an Aymara Chicana ceremonial belt circa 1910, made out of feathers on wood. It's small, it's only like 8 inches by 24. In Brazil, we added Emiliano di Cavalcanti, an artist who sought to produce a form of Brazilian painting free of European influence, with this Navio Negreiro, which translates freely as a slave ship, of 1961. It's 14 feet by 37 feet. In France, we were a little more discreet. We purchased the Jean Dubuffet, the stairwell at the entry. It's 1965, vinyl paint on canvas. In England, up artist Bridget Riley, The Nye of 1966. And even in Puerto Rico, a satellite art program was established to support the work of Puerto Rican artists. It also organized and hosted the San Juan Biennale from 1977 through 1999. From the collection's onset, it had been tacitly understood that as a publicly held corporation, works lewd or violent in nature or politically controversial in subject should be avoided. So our Paul Delvaux, a surrealist famous for his nudes, looked like this, The Last Voyage of 1959. Yet, as David would remark, the art of the day is not always polite, that it can and often reflects powerful and controversial issues. To balance this tendency and ensure that the collection stay true to its innovative beginnings, David did not hesitate to bring the right voices into the art program plans. He invited art historian Robert Rosenblum to join the art committee in 1974 and appointed Jack Bolton, who came into the art program by saying that, he believed that corporate art was an oxymoron as curator in 1979, both of whom were instrumental in encouraging the collection to grow in accordance with his original mandate, to answer to bank needs, yes, while cultivating innovation, scholarship, and imagination. And here are some results. This great Gilbert and George, London of 1980, which is a 16-part hand-colored photograph. Italian Alighiero Boetti, a world map. Designed by the artist, the work was woven by women in Afghanistan in 1978. This David Hockney, Cubist, homage to Cubism through Polaroid photographs. It's the Brooklyn Bridge, November 28, 1982. This is Donald Judd, Untitled 1972, brass work. A rare painting by earth artist Robert Smithson, Purgatory of 1959. And here's an extravagant, almost operatic rendition of utilitarian objects, Chair and Table by Scott Burton, 1982, made of white flint. English recycling example, Tony Cragg, Palette, 1980, which is painted wood and found objects, and Joseph Beuys fell suits. The artists consider themselves portraits. He was a German pilot during World War II. He was shot down over Siberia, suffering severe burns over most of his body. He's rescued by tribesmen who soothe his burns by covering them with animal fat. Keeping the fat in place, they used this rough felt material. So to Beuys, it became his skin. So that's the reason he considered the suits like self-portraits. Then another German artist, Gerhard Richter, Midweek of 1983. An early Bryce Marden from Bob's house, Bob being Robert Rauschenberg. So it's a landscape kind of picture, although it has the height of Robert Rauschenberg. It's 5 feet 10 inches tall by 61 wide. I don't think it was the artist's width, though. One of Chuck Close's monumental portraits of friends, composer Phil Glass, is the artist's answers to Seurat's pointillism, his modern component, an infinity of fingerprints from an ink pad. Daniel Buren, the French conceptual artist, in the dining room, his signature alternating white and colored stripes, silk screen on linen, commissioned for a chaste dining room. I remember David coming out of the room and saying to me, "There's no art in it, there's no art in it." Vito Acconci ladder drawing consists of 15 aluminum ladders of variable dimensions. The date is 1979. Eminent California pop artist Ed Ruscha, cinematic rendition of Columbus Caravels, Man and Wife of 1987. And a diaristic from a diaristic Rome series of Cy Twombly on title Sappho, which sometimes presented a problem at a corporation, 1959, oil on canvas. A primary objective of the art program continued being to support young artists through the purchase and display of their work in chaste offices around the world. So, Haitian-born, master of the sophisticated primitive, Jean-Michel Basquiat, 6 icons of 1982, were bought, as were bought early photographs of Cindy Sherman, the first feminine tract in art history, Window Gazer, Martini Glass, Apron, and Librarian. And I'm sorry to say, this is an early Jeff Koons. I think people applauded when the name was mentioned before. It's a color poster of Basketball Heroes of 1985, along with a basketball bronze, a basketball cast in bronze, and a Mark Tansey called Purity Test, based on an Edward Curtis photograph. the painting is painted in like a sepia photo with a breathtaking vista of Robert Smithson's famous earthwork. So you have the Edward Curtis reference, but it does have that earthwork of Robert Smithson, the Indians looking astonished to the earthwork of Robert Smithson. Davis always expected criticism and complaint, but as he once said, and I quote, "If you insist on quality and excellence as the criteria of making your choices, you may make mistakes and others may disagree with your choices, but you will be standing on firm ground and you will be able to face criticism with equanimity." In accordance with Chase bylaws, Davis' retirement occurred in 1981 at the age of 65. However, he continued as chairman of the bank's International Advisory Committee, as well as a very, very active member of the art committee. The Chase collection had by now become the quintessential corporate collection, the one that was spawning and inspiring all other corporate programs around the world. Bolton's greatest concept, executed with David's total encouragement and support, was the Soho Branch Gallery. Located on Broadway near Houston Street, the bank's Soho branch was in the thick of the experimental New York visual arts scene of its time. Devoted to showcase recent acquisition exhibitions that would rotate 3 times a year, it opened with contemporary Spanish art, and here's one of the paintings in it, Manolo Valdés Overture No. 1, which is based on Matisse's famous Red Studio. Here's another picture, or this is just an installation from the Soho branch as well. Lawrence Weiner hung about within a context of renewal of 1979. One of his last important shows was the first AIDS benefit sponsored in the premises by a corporation. This is Robert Mapplethorpe's self-portrait of 1988. I had joined the program by then, and here are some accomplishments of the latter years. A commission of Peter Halley for the board. It was sort of like a landscape Matisse-based, combined with the conduits reflected the early Manhattan Waterworks Bank, or so the artist had in mind. This is the only outdoor sculpture in Seoul, Korea, of their native son, Namjoon Paik. It's a DNA RNA matrix, and in its base, is in the process of being installed, the 44 Korean last names. Then when Chase Metrotech opened in Brooklyn in 1982, it had with 3 colossal scale site-specific works, and Namjoon Paik again executed one of them, the Chase Information Wall. It is his version of an old-fashioned Chinese tradition to read the day's news from a copy of a newspaper that has been pasted on a public wall. It consists of 429 television sets of various sizes, bringing you live the news through 6 different cable hookups. So it consists of entertainment, news, Dow Jones reading, sports, channels, everything. And another segment of that lobby were the R.M. Fisher Flash Gordon-like Metrotech clocks. And lastly, the Dan Flavin on title for Tracy Harris, his wife at the time. This work is a progression of red, yellow, and green fluorescent lights repeated again and again for 55 meters. There are fluorescent lights on the ceiling, lights on the elevator banks. And last, this work was we bought from a movie producer director named Claude Berry, who needed money for his next production. It's called Read and Reap, which was our sort of headline message for the workers. But you can imagine from the second these works were turned on, most particularly the Flavin, the internal reaction was overwhelmingly negative. This time, a group of workers met the CEO at the airport and demanded that it be removed. I do not need to repeat myself and tell you how extremely supportive and encouraging David was. 1 week later, the New York Times reviewed the lobby of the building, along with every newspaper that was alive then. Critic Dan Cameron, going as far as saying that he had seen the future of art, and believe it or not, it was at Chase Manhattan Bank in Brooklyn. We were an instant success. So, another important situation that happened, another important step in the growth of the art program, we became like corporate cultural ambassadors. Lending was always an active program, but loans had always been limited to 1 or 2 pieces at a time. A few exhibitions drawn solely from the collection had traveled the United States, but never abroad, and this was the first time that an exhibition expanding the post-Vietnam years in America opened in Asia. It broke attendance records in Japan, and here's a detail of the Kenzo Tange building's entryway, and you can detect the Robert Mangold 4 arcs within a circle of 1975 in the background. Another important exhibition was Photoplay, which was the first comprehensive historical exhibition of conceptual photography that opened in Miami and then traveled all over Latin America, bringing information that was not available till then. It was curated by Lisa Phillips. The cover was the thinking camera, as I called it. Laurie Simmons' walking camera, Jimmy the camera, number 2 of 1987. The Richard Prince famous untitled Cowboy of 1989 was in the exhibition. It's an edition of 3. I believe that another of those editions is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. To brag a little, we paid $50,000. I think they paid $1 million. Also, as important was that the first symposium dedicated to photographing contemporary art with local and international artists and critics and art historians accompanied the exhibition at every venue. There was a little celebration towards the end of the century. Art at Work, 40 years of the Chase Manhattan collection, open at the museum in Houston. You can see the Richard Serra in the background, and Sam Francis and Joan Mitchell, and Calder, a Frank Stella Polish Village series, as well as the Joseph Beuys portrait suits. The show was then expanded and brought to New York. At the turn of the century, the art program collaborated with hospitals in New York, as well with the New York Board of Education on a 5-year plan to install art in New York City school. In 2001, a totem pole originally commissioned from native British Columbia artist Kem Mowat, with the incredible title of Raven Puts the Sun in the Sky. It was supposed to go to Chase branch in Tokyo, was reinstalled in the plaza at Once Chase. This is what happened September 11th of 2001. It survived. So did the 4 trees. And a few years later, the plaza was renamed the David Rockefeller Plaza. David has been an amazing example for the roles he has played in the Chase Art Program and the Museum of Modern Art. His accomplishments suggest a way forward for the business and financial sectors and the art world globally. The challenge is to maintain the high standards he established, to expand them and adapt them to the changes that are sure to mark the future of business and the arts. Paraphrasing David, quote, "Their development might be extremely complex, but usually, in the end, highly rewarding." Thank you.
Well, that does conclude the formal part of our symposium, so I'd like you to join me in thanking all of our speakers of today for their wonderfully insightful observations. That being said, before we reward you with a glass of wine, David Allen Brown has a few observations to offer after hearing all of these fascinating presentations. And then I'd like to very briefly open up